This QDS video will demonstrate how to use section header and format elements to modify question numbers as well as the look of your CAPI or ACASI surveys. We'll also take a look at validating your survey and then seeing the results in preview mode. First, we'll take a look at section headers and the different options that you can set. First, you can modify your question numbering for your survey by resetting the prefix, which can be up to 3 letters or a number plus letters. It just can't end in a number. You can also reset the integer. Headers are also useful for documentation and organization. You can insert a page break as well as heading text and customize your item ID, and these types of options show up in your paper documentation, including the codebook. We're going to start out in our sample survey by adding a section header. After our ID information that we have programmed here, we have several demographic questions, and so we want to make this our demographic section by adding a header. So we're going to highlight our gender item, which is the first one in this section, and then we're going to go to Edit, and then we can go to Insert and select Header, or even faster, we can just go to the section header button on that insert element toolbar. Once we do that, that will open the section header element tab. And so let's take a look at those options. First, we do want to reset the question number prefix. Again, this can be up to 3 letters. It just may not end in a number. We're going to call this DEM. Next, we do want to reset our question number integer. This is often useful to do when you're setting up your survey, or if you do want to have it match pre-existing survey. So we're going to reset that at 1. Next, we do want to enter our text for the heading. This will show up in all the paper documentation as well as in our listing, which is great for organization and documentation. Now, we can also set an item ID. We can customize that if we'd like. If we would prefer just to use the defaults, that will be automatically populated when you validate your survey. So we'll take a look in a moment. So after we're done setting our options, we'll select OK. Now, if we go down and look at this gender item, we'll see that it still says question Q4. That's because we have not validated it yet. Note that in order to see updated numbers, you always need to validate. So we're going to go to Tools and then Validate. There's also that keyboard shortcut for that as well. It will let us know if errors have been found, which they haven't, so we are okay to proceed. And now if we go back again to that gender item, you'll see it has updated that question number to DEM1 as we specified under the section header. Now if we go back and look at that again, you'll see that now it has automatically added our item ID, which since it's our first section header is called sect-1. Next, we'll take a look at using format elements. First, just like with section headers, you can use them to reset question numbering. This is very useful when you need to update the numbers but don't want to add a header element. One example might be if you need to remove one or more items but need to keep the question numbering the same. You can also insert a page break in the documentation. Also with format elements, you can use some options that are specific to CAPI or ACASI interviews. Prevent return to previous question option is very useful if there's a place in your survey where you wish to prevent interviewers or respondents from going back to previous questions and making changes. For example, perhaps right after identifier variables have been collected. Next, for either one or multiple question screen items, you can change the space allotted for questions versus response space. And finally, for question or information screen items, you can change the colors for background or font text, which will override the colors that have been set under build options. First, we'll add a format element in our sample questionnaire to reset a question number. So, if we have perhaps deleted a question, we're going to delete our marital status item. But then we want to be sure and keep the question numbering the same. We want to keep our date of birth item still to be question 3. We're going to go ahead and insert a format element. We can do that again by selecting format from the toolbar. We're going to select that question number integer box, and we're going to put a 3 in there and select OK. That's the only item we're going to change. And then after we click validate, we can go and look at our date of birth item, and we can see that the question number has stayed at 3. Next, we're going to take a look at adding a format element to prevent return to previous question. So after our ID information is collected, we don't want an interviewer or respondent to go back and change that information. So here we'll add a format element just following our site ID item. Again, we'll go to Format. And here under CAPI or ACASI interviews, in that box, we're going to select the first choice, which is to disable previous question button option. Again, this is very useful to prevent anyone from going back and making changes. Now we want to indicate that that is the function for this particular format element. So we can go to the Notes tab, and we can just enter there what's going on with this format, and then when we click OK, we can see that that label does appear in the element listing, which is very useful for our documentation. Next, we want to add a format element to modify the size of question text or the buttons in regards to the response size. Now, this is very useful if you have a question with very long responses or very long response text. We have a couple of items in our survey, one asking about what state in which you were born, that has a very long list of responses for all 50 states in a pick one drop down. And then we also have an income question that has quite a few responses. So we'd like to give a little bit more room for responses for those two items. So right before the state born item, we're going to add another format element. And then here we're going to select the second choice under CAPI ACASI interviews, which is modify, restore size of question text and standard buttons. Now, when we check this box, this is now going to enable the size tab. So now we can click on that. And then here we have a box, alter space for questions. Now, if we drag this box up shorter, we can see now we have less space allotted for questions, or we can make it very large to allow more space for the question. So for these, we want to make the question box very small because we have a lot of responses to show. Also, just for illustration purposes, we're going to alter the state of the standard buttons and make those smaller as well. Again, that just gives more space on the screen for any items where you may need it. Now we're going to go to our Notes tab, and we're just going to make a note telling us what this particular element is for, and we'll say OK, and there now you can see that format element is right before our state born item. Now, right after income, we want to change the size back. So we're going to go ahead and insert a format element again. Once again, we'll click that Modify Restore Size option and then click again on that Size tab. And here we can just restore it to the system defaults. And under Notes, we can just say Reset the Size, just so that we have documentation to see what we've done here. Next, we want to add a format element to change the color of some of the backgrounds for our survey. So we're going to go down to the beginning of our health section, and we've decided that we want to change the background for this part. So once again, we're going to go ahead and click on Format Element. This time under CAPI ACASI Interviews, we'll make the last option box checked, which is to modify or restore the color of screen items. After we've checked that, we'll go to the Color tab. And now here you can see the default showing, or what we've already set up under Build Options, which is a light blue background. What we'd like to do is change this to a light green background for this section. We're going to do that for the main window. And we select that under Screen Items. Now we want to make the question text windows match. So we're also going to set that item background to light green. Now for illustration purposes, let's say that we want to change our question text to a different color as well. We would set that under Item Foreground. We can turn it to a very bright color, a red, just so you can see what that looks like. And maybe we've decided that's a little too bright, so now we want to change it to perhaps dark green. But then if you want to further change that color, you can click that Other box. That'll take you to the Colors window. You can change it to a standard color on the wheel, or to a custom color where you can set it to exactly what you'd like and then select OK. And you can see that shown again in the demo box. And then we'll do the same thing for information text, where we're going to change that background to light green. Once we're done setting all of our colors, we'll go ahead and select OK. Now, similar to when we reset the size of box, we want to change it back after the end of that health section. So we're going to add another format element. And here, once again, we'll go to that Modify Color option and go to the Color tab. And here, once again, we're restoring it to that system default, and we'll say OK. Note that, like with the size feature, this format option overrides any colors set on the CAPI or ACASI build options. However, there are just not as many ways to change colors with format elements. For example, if you wanted to set the Edit Message box text color, that can only be done under build options. Next, we're going to take a look at how these question numbering and format element changes look in preview mode. To learn more about using the preview feature, see that tutorial video. In preview mode, we're going to take a look at how all of those options are showing for format. So we're going to enter our interviewer ID, and then you'll notice here we can go back using previous question if we need to, and forward again. But now, after entering site ID, this is where we set the prevent return from previous question option. So at this point, that previous question button is disabled and we cannot go back. We'll enter our first demographics item and date of birth. And then now we're at the state born question, and this is where we have changed the size of the question box, so it is a lot smaller. You'll also notice this is where we made the standard button smaller, and this gives us more room for our very long drop-down box. And this is also the case for the next question, our income item, where we have quite a few responses, and so it's nice to have extra space for those. And now for the next item, This has gone back to where there is more room for question text since we don't have quite as long a responses. Now we've reached our health section, and this is where we did change that background color to green for information elements, as well as for questions. And as you might recall, we also changed the font text also to a different color. Here it is in that dark green. And after we finish our health section, now the color has gone back to that default that we had set up before. That's all for this video, but to learn more about CAPI and ACASI options, preview mode, and other QDS features, see QDS Online Help or other Design Studio videos.